Welcome to the first lecture of AP African American Studies. In this lecture, we're going to cover the first topic, what is African American Studies? There are two learning objectives, and the first one is to describe the features that characterize African American Studies. To answer the question, what is African American Studies, we will see that it is an interdisciplinary field. This means that it isn't just a history class that you're going to be taking. It could also be a literature class or an art class in which we look at the major contributions of people of African descent, or what's known as the African diaspora. These are people who left the African continent primarily through the transatlantic slave trade, but also includes those that have left Africa even after the slave trade is over. We will cover the history of African Americans, going all the way back to African history. We'll look at the major figures, empires, and events, and we'll see the culture and languages that were spoken on the African continent, and then how those translated to the Americas. We will also explore the religion and traditions of African Americans, as well as their contribution to art, literature, and music throughout history. As a short example, here is a poem by one of the Harlem Renaissance's main figures, Claude McKay, titled If We Must Die. Interestingly enough, Claude McKay was born in Jamaica, so he could be considered Caribbean American, Afro-Caribbean, or African American. The poem talks about the fate of African Americans, and here is the beginning of it. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us barked the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die. The origins of this discipline go back to the early 1900s. It emerged from Black artistic, intellectual, and political endeavors that predated its formalization as a field. Two Black intellectuals in the United States, Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois, promoted the legitimacy of Black studies as a field in academia. Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, and he is credited with the creation of Black History Week, which later expanded into Black History Month. W.E.B. Du Bois was a sociologist in the early 1900s. He is famous for being the first Black man to earn a PhD from Harvard. He also continued to advocate for civil rights for African Americans through the early 1900s. He was one of the co-founders of the NAACP, that is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and wrote extensively about Black history, African history, and their place and contributions to world history. By the mid-20th century, colleges began to offer Black studies or African American studies as a major. The discipline tries to understand contemporary Black freedom struggles and place them in the context of all the history African Americans have endured. Woodson, through the early 1900s, was the editor of the Journal of Negro History and the Negro History Bulletin, combating negative portrayals in history and the media. There are close ties to Africa in this course because it examines the development of ideas about Africa's history, framing Africa as essential to the story of African Americans. While other histories studied or written in the early 1900s had Europe as a principal actor and only mentioned Africa as a supporting cast, sometimes even portraying Africa as an ahistorical place, African American Studies puts Africa at the center of the discipline. The course will examine the continent's ongoing relationship with communities of the African diaspora. We'll look at the impact Africa has had, which does not merely end after the transatlantic slave trade, but continues to hold a place in the lives and minds of African Americans in America. The diasporic Africans embrace their transnational homeland and lineage, sometimes claiming African roots to place them where enslaved people were not taken from, such as Ethiopia or Egypt, to share in the contributions of these civilizations. The second objective for today is to describe the developments that led to the incorporation of African American studies into United States colleges and universities in the 1960s and 1970s. The advocacy led by W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson in the early 1900s began to bear fruit in the mid-20th century, partially because of the Civil Rights Movement. The aim of the Civil Rights Movement was to dismantle the segregation system of Jim Crow, which put Black and white students in different schooling systems, and also the Black Power movement that followed. This promoted Black pride, self-determination, and empowerment, rejecting the dominant white culture. This culture of uplift and access to places of higher learning became a reality with two major Supreme Court cases. The first case, Sweat v. Painter in 1950, was about access to the University of Texas Law School. Heman Sweat, the main plaintiff, argued that admission to the all-Black law school in Texas would not be equivalent to attending the University of Texas Law School. Therefore, the separate but equal doctrine established under Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 did not hold true for graduate programs. In 1954, this was expanded, and the separate but equal doctrine was completely overturned by the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas decision, which desegregated all public education. Black students were no longer mandated to attend separate schooling systems from white students, though it took about 15 years for the promises of Brown to be implemented in America's school system. There was a resistance to the Brown decision through the 1960s in universities, primarily the University of Mississippi or Ole Miss and the University of Alabama. In both instances, there was a significant white resistance to black students enrolling. At the University of Alabama, Governor George Wallace famously stood in front of the door of the main building to keep the student James Meredith from enrolling. Despite this resistance, the new access to these higher learning institutions made Black studies and African American studies more prevalent courses of study. From 1965 to 1972, the Black campus movement saw hundreds of thousands of Black students, along with Latino, Asian, and white allies, leading protests across over 1,000 universities and colleges. They demanded greater support for minority students and hiring of more Black faculty and staff, resulting in significant changes in higher education. One of the most notable outcomes was the establishment of Black Studies departments, with San Francisco State College, now San Francisco State University, being the first to create such a department following a 5-month-long student strike in 1968 to 1969. The movement also led to the expansion of curricula to include African American history, literature, politics, and culture, moving away from a predominantly Eurocentric focus. Support services for Black students, such as cultural centers, advising programs, and scholarships were created to help them succeed academically. The Black campus movement also inspired similar efforts among other minority groups, leading to the creation of Chicano studies, Native American studies, and Asian American studies programs. The first Black Student Union was established also at the San Francisco State University in 1965, marking a significant step in the movement. Overall, the Black campus movement was instrumental in transforming higher education by ensuring that the contributions and experiences of Black people were recognized and valued within academia. The third learning objective is to explain how African American studies enriches the study of early Africa and its relationship to communities of the African diaspora. This learning objective exemplifies how this course is different from a normal history class. It is more of an interdisciplinary course, and we will frequently refer back to the present or the recent past to see how the history we are learning affects or impacts recent movements in the lives of diasporic Africans today. We start with the rich African history, and Africa is the birthplace of all humanity. Paleontologists have found fossil records of the hominid group to which Homo sapiens belong. The skull of the earliest human ancestor, nicknamed Lucy, was found in Ethiopia in 1974. Beyond the rise of humans, there were also major ancient civilizations like the Egyptians. The major architectural feats that are still around today are a testament to their achievements. And a few thousand years after the Egyptians, there were large and strong civilizations in West Africa flourishing at the same time that Europe was going through its dark ages. For example, the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires were among the richest in the world and were centers of learning where scholars sought new knowledge. This course will examine the development of arts, architecture, technology, politics, religion, and music in early African societies. The ancient societies we will look at include Egypt, Nubia, Kush, Aksum, and the Bantu. We will also study the medieval empires of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Great Zimbabwe, and Congo. The long history of these innovations informs African Americans' experience and identities, allowing them to feel proud and share in the success and contributions of these societies. Another goal of this course is to dispel misconceptions about Africa. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, some historians dismissed Africa's place in history, viewing it as an ahistorical place where culture or technological innovations did not originate. More recent research has shown that Africa is a diverse continent with complex societies throughout history that have made enduring contributions to humanity. For example, the city of Timbuktu in the old Songhai Empire was the center of knowledge with the most universities and libraries in the world. African societies were globally connected through trade before the onset of the transatlantic slave trade. There were empires in East Africa that gained wealth from overseas trade conducted between the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, the Arabian Peninsula, and India. And finally, Europeans had heard about major African figures like Mansa Musa making his Hajj or pilgrimage to Mecca in the Middle Ages because of all the gold that he was dispensing along the way. In recap, African American Studies is an interdisciplinary course that examines the history, culture, and contributions of the African diaspora. It started as an effort to preserve Black history and dispel negative portrayals of Black people and places in history. The main figures you should remember are Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois. African history is central to this course, and the diaspora experiences a transnational attachment to Africa. Black Studies programs were adopted by colleges and universities as a result of the civil rights, Black pride, and Black campus movements. Finally, African American Studies embraces Africa's rich history from ancient civilizations to its latest contributions. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, click the thumbnail on the screen. And if you would like more resources to help you study, you can visit apushlights.com/afam. I wish you the best of luck with your studies, and I hope to see you back on the next lecture.